The movie begins by showing the harsh and rugged terrain of Afghanistan. The setting is desolate and mountainous, emphasizing the isolation and danger of the environment. We see American soldiers patrolling this hostile landscape, highlighting the ongoing conflict. The camera focuses on a cave where Mohammed, a Taliban fighter, is hiding. Inside, Mohammed drags a dead body and takes the items the deceased man was carrying. The soldiers approach the cave, conversing quietly while one scans the area. The soldiers maintained a playful banter as they trekked through the desert, their laughter and casual conversations filling the air. Among them, only one soldier took the job seriously, diligently scanning the area with a keen eye and remaining alert to any potential threats. Mohammed waits, ready with a gun in hand. As the soldiers near the entrance to launch their attack, Mohammed sets off an explosive. Amid the chaos and explosions, he manages to escape, but the soldiers quickly pursue him. Mohammed runs through the desert, chased by helicopters. As they fire near him, an explosion throws him off his feet. He lies on the ground, disoriented by the blast and deafened by the loud noise. Soldiers surround him, capture him, and place a bag over his head, along with other prisoners. They transport him to an interrogation room where an officer begins questioning him. Mohammed remains silent, his hearing impaired from the earlier explosion. Following the interrogation, his hair is cut, and he is prepared for transfer to prison. In a prison cell, they tie Mohammed up and start torturing him to extract information. They beat him severely, causing him to have a flashback of a woman in a desert. The scene then shifts to a van where prisoners, including Mohammed, are being transported. As they travel, the van crashes and the prisoners are thrown from the vehicle. Soldiers from another van rush to the scene to rescue the prisoners. Mohammed, who has fallen into a bush, watches the soldiers approach the crashed van from a distance. Seizing the opportunity, he runs into the woods. Mohammed walks barefoot on the ice, still chained up, but the pain becomes unbearable. He returns to the crashed van, hoping to be recaptured, but finds it abandoned. Nearby, he spots a parked van and approaches it. He manages to overpower a man standing outside, taking his gun and shooting him. He then opens the van and shoots the man inside. Mohammed quickly changes into one of their uniforms and searches the van for supplies. He finds clothes and dresses in them before driving away in the van. He noticed a helicopter in the sky and decided to leave the van and continue on foot. As he walked through the heavy ice rain, he headed towards the woods. Once there, he glanced up to check for the helicopter, but it wasn't in sight. The helicopter continued to scan the area and eventually spotted Mohammed on the ground. They reported the sighting and requested permission to shoot, but soon lost visual contact. Reporting the loss, soldiers on foot, accompanied by their dogs, began searching the area. Mohammed, holding a gun, kept walking. As he moved forward, his leg got caught in a trap. He screamed in pain and fell to the ground. Quickly, he started removing his shoes to free himself from the trap. The helicopter noted his stop and reported it, but Mohammed managed to free himself and continued walking. The soldiers arrived at the trap and found his abandoned shoes, but Mohammed was nowhere to be seen. The dogs picked up his scent from the shoes and continued the pursuit. As Mohammed walked, he encountered a stray dog. He took off his socks and put them on the dog, hoping to mislead the search dogs by having them follow the stray's scent instead. He hid behind a tree, but one of the search dogs spotted him and started barking. As he tried to evade, Mohammed slipped and fell into an icy pool. The dog, dragging the soldier holding its leash, reached Mohammed and began attacking him. In desperation, Mohammed pulled out a knife and repeatedly stabbed the dog until it stopped. He then stripped the fallen soldier of his clothes and shoes and continued running through the snow. Meanwhile, Mohammed found a wooden bird chest and decided to use it as a makeshift shelter for the night. Exhausted, he curled up inside and soon fell asleep. As he slept, he was haunted by the same recurring flashback. He saw a woman in a bustling market, her face familiar, holding a baby in her arms. He woke up the next morning. As he emerged from his hiding spot, he noticed reindeer and goats grazing nearby. He walked out of his makeshift shelter and began to wander around, taking in his surroundings. Soon, he came across a running river and decided to approach it. Kneeling by the riverbank, he began digging into the mud with his hands. As he dug, ants crawled onto his skin. Driven by hunger, he started eating the ants, finding a small measure of sustenance in the tiny insects. He then resumed walking through the woods, often crawling due to the rugged terrain. Exhausted by the constant struggle, he sat down briefly to catch his breath, but knew he couldn't afford to rest for long. Pushing himself to keep moving, he eventually reached a point of complete fatigue. Unable to go any further, he kneeled beside a tree and broke down in tears. In a desperate move, he started carving the bark from the tree and eating it, hoping to find some energy. Just as he was about to give up, he heard the distant sound of a helicopter approaching. The noise spurred him into action, and he forced himself to get up and start running again, driven by the instinct to survive. As he was hiding, he spotted a truck loaded with wood approaching. Seizing the opportunity, he decided to sneak towards it and hop on. He lay low among the logs as the truck continued on its way. After some time, the truck came to a stop, and Mohammed carefully climbed down, seeking cover under a nearby bush. Two men got out of the truck, carrying equipment to cut more wood from the the trees. They began unloading their tools, unaware of Muhammad's presence. Hidden beneath the foliage, Muhammad watched them closely, planning his next move while trying to remain unseen. Muhammad fell asleep in the spot where he had hidden, exhaustion overwhelming him. As he slept, his mind was flooded with vivid flashbacks. He saw the moment he killed the soldiers in the cave, their faces twisted in shock and pain. The memory shifted to his time in prison, where he endured brutal torture, the agony of which seemed to last forever. Finally, his thoughts returned to the recent past, replaying the scene of him killing the strangers in the van, the fear and confusion in their eyes haunting him. Then the dog attacked him. The next morning, the men who had been cutting trees returned to their work. Muhammad, still hidden, saw one of the men approaching the tree he was hiding under and starting to cut it. As the man focused on his task, Muhammad seized the moment to get up and put the man in a headlock. The man retaliated by punching him, and a physical struggle ensued. During the intense fight, Muhammad spotted the chainsaw still running on the ground. Summoning his strength, he pushed the man towards the chainsaw. The man struggled fiercely, but Muhammad kept pushing him until the man fell onto the running chainsaw, the machine cutting into him. Muhammad watched, panting heavily, as the man succumbed to his injuries. Muhammad, now covered in blood, resumed walking. The weight of his recent actions bore heavily on him as he made his way through the woods. He eventually reached a river, where he knelt and began washing the blood off his body, the cold water stinging his skin, but offering some relief. After cleaning himself, he started running again, but exhaustion soon caused him to collapse to the ground. Determined, he forced himself to get up and continue walking. As he moved forward, he came across a berry tree. Hungry and weak, he eagerly ate the berries, savoring their sweetness and the energy they provided. Feeling slightly rejuvenated, he continued his journey driven by the will to survive. As he was walking, Muhammad noticed a familiar blue garment from his flashbacks floating on the river. He was in shock. As he followed the garment with his eyes, he saw the woman from his memories standing in front of him. He stared at her, still eating the berries, his mind struggling to grasp the reality of the situation, but suddenly she vanished. Confused and unsettled, he looked around, but there was no one there. His attention was then drawn to the stray dog he had used to distract the soldiers. The dog appeared and began to walk away, prompting Muhammad to follow it into the woods. As he trailed behind, the dog led him to a clearing where he found a group of other stray dogs. The dogs circled him, barking loudly, causing Muhammad to scream in response. Overwhelmed by anxiety, he covered his ears, trying to block out the noise. The relentless barking and his exhaustion finally took their toll, and he fell to the ground. As he collapsed, the dogs surrounded him. Muhammad then got up and saw a man fishing by the river. Driven by hunger, he stole a fish and ran as the man cursed at him from behind. He didn't stop until he was a safe distance away, where he began eating the fish raw. As he continued through the woods, he spotted a person riding a bicycle. He watched as the rider lost balance and fell to the ground. Approaching cautiously, he saw it was a woman with a baby. She sat on the ground and began breastfeeding the baby. Driven by desperation, Muhammad took out his gun and slowly approached her. He pointed the gun at her. The woman, terrified, tried to push him away, but he was too strong. Ignoring her struggles, he attempted to drink her breast milk. The woman, overwhelmed and terrified, eventually passed out. Just then, he noticed a car approaching in the distance. Fearing discovery, he quickly hid in the underbrush. He cried, kneeling, overcome with a mix of guilt and despair. After a while, he pulled himself together and continued walking through the woods. As night fell, he sat down to rest, the sound of an approaching storm rumbling in the distance. Exhausted, he fell asleep and began dreaming. In his dream, he saw a cozy house with a woman sleeping inside. The scene was peaceful until a dog started barking, jolting him awake. Disoriented, he looked around and through the darkness noticed a house in the distance. He approached another house and saw a woman inside through the window. Exhaustion finally overtook him and he collapsed by the door. Hearing the thud, the woman opened the door and found him unconscious on her doorstep. Quickly, she pulled him into the house, checking for a heartbeat. Satisfied that he was alive, she began to remove his clothes to treat his wounds. As she tended to him, he awoke with a scream of pain and bolted upright. Before he could gather his bearings, the woman noticed a car approaching from outside. She walked to the door, watching as two men made their way toward the house. When they started asking questions, she responded using sign language, indicating that she couldn't hear. After a brief exchange, the men seemed convinced and left. She walked over to Muhammad and carefully took his gun away, setting it aside. Helping him to the couch, she allowed him to rest. While he slept, she gathered bandages and clean clothes. When he woke, she assisted him in cleaning up and changing into fresh clothes. Afterward, she provided him with food and stood by the door, making it clear that she wanted him to leave once he had finished. Understanding her silent message, Muhammad got up and walked to the door. Before he left, she gave him a horse. Grateful, he mounted the horse and resumed his journey. As he continued riding the horse, Muhammad began coughing up blood. Barely conscious, he clung to the horse, his body weakening with each passing moment. Blood continued to spill from his mouth, staining the snow beneath him. His grip on the horse loosened, and he eventually collapsed, his body slumping over the horse's back. The movie concluded concludes with a poignant and haunting image. The horse walking slowly through the snow, its steps steady but without Muhammad on its back. The desolate landscape stretches out, emphasizing the somber end to his harrowing journey. And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our video. Watch the next recaps on the screen and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing recaps.